Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, for several decades, nuclear proliferation has been focused on a triumvirate of land-based, i.e., ICBM, bomber-based, and sea-based missile weapons. But over the past few years, nuclear powers have begun to focus on more tactical uses of their nuclear weapons, and a recent test by Russia of a new missile class has invariably upped the stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to put this in very simple terms, this is undoubtedly the deadliest weapon that has ever been produced in human history. It completely changes the perspective of what a potential nuclear conflict would be, based on, as you said, what you mentioned at the start of this podcast. And therefore, it's something that the West will largely say nothing about, particularly the United States, but they are now going to be deeply, deeply fearful of what the implications of this could be. And I stress could be, because we're always back to the point I don't see World War III ever happening on any basis whatsoever. But you can't rule out the fact that Russia now possesses technology that changes the whole emphasis of mass destruction weapons. To put this also in context, this, and these are Putin's words, you can believe it or not believe it, he said that this Poseidon significantly exceeds even the destructive potential of a Sarmat, which is Russia's largest ICBM. Now, to put that in context, the claim is the Sarmat can destroy, I mean destroy in totality, an area the size of France, just one Sarmat. So if it can significantly exceed the destructive potential of the Sarmat, excuse me, then what are we dealing with? This is something that would be very difficult to comprehend, the level of devastation it would cause. Now, typically the argument can always be, if you had conventional nuclear weapons, you have a period of time when, in principle, and I stress in principle, you might be able to take evasive action to deal with it. With regards to the Poseidon, there is no way you can deal with the risk of, or the threat of it, because you won't even know it's coming. And we'll explain why shortly. And really, it's very telling in the context of the Ukraine war that in less than 12 months, Russia unveiled the Resnik, which is hypersonic weapon. We're also going to talk about, if I can pronounce this, the Vesnik, which is a nuclear cruise missile that has the claim unlimited range. And now this Poseidon. Now, for me, the Poseidon is, like all weapons of this nature of mass destruction, the ultimate deterrent. Why? Because it's a weapon that can never be, if it was utilized, to be destroyed, to be intercepted, or anything else. And I'll come on to the reasons why shortly.
One of the fascinating things I see about this is in the 1950s or 60s, after obviously hydrogen nuclear bombs replaced, what was it? Yeah. Helium replaced the hydrogen for power and devastation. The Soviet Union came out with the Tsar Bomba, which was pretty much a planet killer. And it was had the same intention. It was a doomsday device. It wasn't going to be used. It was beyond the scope of power of anything that the United States, Europe, or had. Now you take a look at what Russia has done over time. Is they've taken similar capabilities to Tsar Bomba, but they've made them into smaller, more compact vehicles that can do the same type of devastation. Obviously, you mentioned the Sarmat. Interestingly enough, the Poseidon is not referred to by Putin as a missile. It's considered, or a submarine or underwater craft. He's considering it a drone. And that brings us into a whole new chapter of the way nuclear vehicles are sent. Because take a look at what the United States is doing. The United States is changing its focus to space-based. That's why they created the Space Force. You take a look at North Korea, and the fear with North Korea sending over a missile was not that the missile would actually detonate on the surface, but more that it would detonate in the atmosphere and create a massive EMP, which would take down the infrastructure, etc. Now we've got the Poseidon drone, which has its own unique capabilities. This is something that the West or other nuclear powers can't even comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is uh, basically, in very simple terms, 100-ton nuclear drone. So the Russians, and people will argue and say this, I don't believe this. Well, fine, don't believe it. Doesn't matter. But Putin confirmed that they had this successful test of it. Now, this was something that got mentioned back, and I made reference to this previously. The speech he gave to the Russian Duma in March of 2018, when he made reference to this, that this was under testing and under construction, etc. And it was one of those weapons that was eventually going to see the light of day. Now, for me, the successful test is a confirmation that it's battle ready. They won't say that, but rather like the Chinese, when they're in the process of building something, then they won't say anything. When it is built, they'll say they're building it. They're always one iteration behind. But this is a nuclear powered underwater drone. In essence, it will render Western defense systems obsolete, and that's not an exaggeration. The drone's supposed to be over 20 meters long. It can dive below 1,000 meters. Critically, it can travel unlimited distances totally undetected, and therefore it can creep up to international waters off the western east coast of the United States, for argument's sake, and it can then strike the coastlines with either a nuclear payload or what is claimed to be a 200-meter radioactive tsunami in the process. Now, either way, this would cause massive devastation. And whereas you might get however long it takes for a nuclear warhead that's fired from Russia, for argument's sake, to reach the United States, with this, the first thing you'll know about it is when it's detonated its payload, whether it is a nuclear payload or this tsunami. So the test, by all accounts, is it was launched from a submarine. It then obviously has nuclear propulsion system, and therefore it can travel unlimited distances under full power. There is no method to intercept them, and there isn't anything comparable to it at this point in time. The fact the Russians have claimed it has more destructive potential than the Sama should be extremely concerning, not for the average person in the street or cooler heads inside Washington and NATO, but for the hotheads inside NATO and Washington and the like, because that is about as deadly a weapon as you're ever going to see. And it just removes the whole need for any tactical nuclear weapons or anything. You don't have to blow your cover whatsoever. That, if you had a real adversary, if there really was the risk of a nuclear war happening, that would tip the balance enormously. But in the eyes of some Americans, that's exactly what they'll now feel has happened. And with all these things, the one thing you don't tend to hear is any Western response to this. They just keep absolutely quiet. They don't come out and say, it's not real. We don't believe it exists. I wouldn't doubt that they have seen evidence of the utilization of this in some capacity. I don't doubt the Russians will give enough to say, well, we're going to test this weapon, because they probably will have had to have told the Americans, doesn't matter where they're testing it, look, we're testing this weapon. Because if the Americans became aware of this gigantic underwater torpedo traveling who knows what distances, that potentially could cause a major incident. So I would suspect the Russians would have said, we're testing this new weapon, and told the Americans, which is why now it's in the public domain. So the Americans are probably aware of this. They're aware of what its potential is, that it can travel undetected, it can't be intercepted. And rather like now, they've seen firsthand what the Oreshnik can do. Fortuitously, of course, they can't see firsthand what the Poseidon can do. But if what the Russians are claiming is its potential, then it is the most devastating weapon on the planet, and it's a nuclear deterrent that can't be detected. The argument is, and I can't be an expert by any stretch of the imagination on every nuclear device in the world, but I would suspect there aren't that many that can't be detected in some way, shape, or form. So this transforms so-called weapons of, I wouldn't call it mass destruction, I'd call it a lot greater, enormous destruction. And that will be giving someone somewhere in the Beltway some serious food for thought, especially in light of what's currently going on between the United States and obviously Russia with regards to Ukraine.
It's interesting because when I started reading up on these two weapons systems, and something we forgot to mention, these were already in the works and being projected back in 2018. President Putin mentioned in 2018 that there were six super weapons that were in the pipeline. So when we talk about something coming out now, this was already in the works in 2018, and it gives credence to what we've talked about in the past. When China or Russia announces something, it's more than likely they've actually surpassed that, and they have weapon systems that they haven't announced that are in the process of even surpassing what they are currently announcing. But with this being said, when I started reading about it and we started talking about it, there's two elements in regards to this that reminded me of Hollywood movies. A, uh nuclear drone underwater that is undetectable. And I was reminded of the movie The Hunt for Red October, where they had a new propulsion system for their submarines where the U.S. couldn't track it using its sonar nets or other submarines. And then, of course, you haven't mentioned what some of the capabilities and potentialities of what this device will do, but it reminds me of the movie Deep Impact when a meteor crashed into the ocean and what happened from there.
Well, yeah, and I was going to come on to that bit. Yeah, because clearly, if this was to cause these massive tsunamis, then it would cause devastation along the east and west coast of the United States. If it possesses a firepower significantly greater than Sama, which, as I said, can destroy an area the size of France, then it takes on an entirely different dimension altogether. So I don't want to get into that discussion because we're not trying to glorify the use of weapons. I'm totally against all forms of war. We're just saying Russia has this technology and then potentially could utilize it. I don't think this will ever happen, but it's a way that will sharpen certain minds in the West who frankly need sharpening because they're extremely blunt, to put it diplomatically. Another thing worth briefly mentioning, because this is kind of complementary, is this very unpronounceable Berezovnik, which is this, again, unlimited range nuclear powered missile. It can evade all missile defense systems. The Russians did a test on October the 21st. Apparently, it completed a multi-hour flight that covered 14,000 kilometers. Tell me the Americans weren't aware of that also. Absolutely, they will have been aware of it. Because, again, Russia would not have just done so without telling them, because there is a risk of this is perceived as miscalculation. The 14,000 kilometers was just for the test. It doesn't mean that's the limit or the range for it. So it makes it capable, according to the Russians, of striking highly protected targets at any distance with guaranteed accuracy. Now, there's no doubt if the Americans were tracking this, they'll have seen how it performed vertical and horizontal maneuvers. It's very flexible. It can evade anti-missile defense systems. I mean, and therefore, on that basis, again, the question is, can it be? Obviously, nuclear warhead on it? Yes. The other question is, guess what was also revealed in 2018? The Berezovsky. I mean, and at the time, it was described as a one-off kind of weapon because it doesn't follow a ballistic trajectory. And the fact it has an unlimited range allows it to maneuver on that basis indefinitely. So there is no other weapon of its kind in the world, in any way, shape, or form. And again, the potential of this weapon is extremely worrying, or should be, for their less than cool heads in the US. Why? Because inexplicably, the United States is only able to defend itself through the North Pole region because they never believed that anyone would manufacture weapons that could fly a long enough range to warrant protecting itself from the South Pole. Now, Russia has weapons like the Sarmat or this Berezovsky, where it can launch these missiles from the South Pole region totally with no missile defense system in place. It's just basically an open door into the United States. Many people don't know that's the case, but it absolutely is true. And this is another example of one of these weapons where how long is it going to be before someone is actually even aware of its existence? I mean, because its range is unlimited, it also flies at quite low altitudes. I think it's like maximum of 100 meters. It doesn't fly particularly quickly, but it doesn't need to because it's so able to like turn vertically and horizontally, like literally handbrake turn in a car. Again, is Russia releasing this information now for a purpose? Yes. Again, it's to sharpen minds in the West to go, look, we've had in the last year, we've admitted to the Erashnik, we've admitted to this Poseidon, we've admitted to this Berezovsky. Well, maybe there's a few other weapons that we've got in the pipeline that actually are ready for combat duty, and we'll tell you we're testing them because we do that out of politeness and also because we want to avoid any serious major misunderstanding as to what the hell we are. Firing a missile that's flying around for 14,000 kilometers, clearly you wouldn't do that without telling someone because that's how accidents happen that can cause huge global devastation events. So this is going to give the United States and its allies a lot of food for thought. But as I said, the silence is deafening because they'll have been briefed on this and said, you do realize they possess these weapons. They'll also be terrified that Russia might decide to use them in Ukraine, even though, of course, that's never going to happen. Well, you should never say never, but I don't see any reason why it would. But again, this shows Russia militarily is light years ahead of the West. And how many more Berezovskys or Poseidons or the Erashnik are going to have to be created or admitted to before someone in the West goes, do you know what? We ought to stop provoking Russia, stop making idiotic claims, get them around the negotiating table and end the Ukraine war. Because I'm sure in part this is why they're doing this, just to sharpen the minds of those who, frankly, their minds are rather blunt to reality. But make no mistake, this is the Poseidon, arguably the most dangerous weapon created in history, because it can be devastating, but it's impossible to detect it. And of course, it's unmanned, etc., etc. So it doesn't matter if there's no collateral damage with a weapon of that kind.
Yeah, it'd definitely be interesting and fascinating to be a fly on the wall uh, when President Trump suddenly realizes that his Golden Dome defense system is pretty much nullified even before he started the first day of construction. Paul, were there any other further thoughts you wanted to add to this?
No, I think that's fine.
To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.